right, it's time for the news update with contributing writer Jake Fogelman. And this week, obviously, we're going to be talking a little more in depth about the exclusive document that we've obtained here at the Reload and published. Jake had a piece that was specifically about the membership numbers and data that's in this report that relates to that. Obviously, we mentioned earlier with Professor Mittendorf that membership has the revenue from dues has fallen, well, by about half since 2018, according to this report. And I think that is a pretty huge deal. That's really the driver of the downturn overall in revenue for the NRA. But I wanted to get a little more into the specifics with you, Jake. I think you wrote a whole story on this. So what is some of the big things that stuck out to you that you put in your piece?
Sure, yeah. So as you said, membership really is kind of the backbone of the NRA. It's where they usually get the bulk of their revenue. It's the bulk of their strength politically. But this report that we obtained shows a little bit of a struggle that the organization has had, excuse me, over the last couple of years. In the past, they've claimed that they've had up to 6 million members. In the NRA First Freedom magazine, for example, they published an article boasting that they've had 6 million members.
Yeah, back in 2018, right? That was the
correct.
claim. Right, and obviously we have a graph here that shows that was never true,
correct.
Or at least this graph contradicts that claim. Because when you look at it, the number never even got to 5.5 million. So we reached out to the NRA on this, and I read their statement earlier in the show, but they never specifically explained why there's this huge dichotomy between what they're, and that's not it's not like just a random official made this claim. That's one of their top magazines made this claim, and it's contradicted by their own internal report here. So it's a bit confusing as to why that is. But yeah, and then since that time, 2018 was the high water mark, though, according to, at least according to the documents we have here, and they've continued to see a decline. Is that correct in overall membership?
That's right. Year over year since 2018, there's been a decline. It is worth noting 2018 was the high water mark. It was the only year on this report that they actually were over 5 million members, which is, when they don't claim 6 million, the common thing you hear is they're about 5 million strong. But it looks like that was only really the case in 2018. But as you say, since then, it's declined pretty modestly. It was a big decline from 2018 to 2019, but more modestly since then. They're just over 4.5 million or over 4.5 million. It's tough to tell based on the graph.
Yeah, they don't give, this report doesn't have exact numbers on total members. They just put it into a bar graph, and so it's hard to get an exact feeling of that. But you're correct. Since 2012, only 3 years they have on here actually reaching 5 million members at the end of the, as the end of the year. Now 2021 is a little different because that's as of August 31st. So perhaps they gained more, they netted more members by the end of 2021. That data is not available and probably will never be public, because this sort of data is not, the only time you ever hear about how many members the NRA has is from the NRA, because they don't have to disclose this information as part of their normal reporting requirements for their 501c4. They have to file certain tax documents with the IRS every year and certain states. So that's called a 990, and that gives a lot of details, but they don't have to disclose their donors, and they don't have to disclose how many of them they have if they don't want to. And so usually they'll just talk about it in general terms and round numbers. But this is the first, really, this is the most information we've ever had about the NRA's membership. And look, it doesn't, other than that problem between the claim of 6 million and what the internal graph shows, it's not wildly off from what they usually say. Sure. Although, I guess to your point earlier here, usually they'll say 5 million, and what this shows is that they're not usually at 5 million. They're usually between 4.5 million and 5 somewhere. That's what they are most years on this graph. But it's not as though they're constantly making up numbers.
Sure.
Outside of 2018, which is a significant difference between what they've said and what this internal report shows. Because you often will hear people sort of infer that the NRA's membership numbers are made up or illegitimate or whatever.
Sure.
And I always thought that wasn't necessarily the case, because honestly, what they've been saying publicly outside of 2018 when they claimed 6 million, I wrote about this a while back during the bankruptcy. Wayne LaPierre gave the exact number, which was less than 5 million, similar to what this report shows. But the thing is, 5 million was impressive in 2013 because they gained 1 million members that year, but they've been pretty consistently stagnant since that time. And I've written about this in the past for our members. Like, that's a problem, especially when you've seen huge gains in gun ownership over this time period. The gun sales were through the roof during this entire time period, and especially just recently. So, 5 million is a huge number. It's biggest of any group by far, as when you talk about dues paying members in the gun world. Even still with the declines, they're still way beyond anyone else. But the long-term trend here is not that far off from what we have known publicly, and is not positive. Right. Like, it's a pretty negative trend as far as membership goes. But you also went over in here, they compare 2021 to the previous year, right? The same period. And what do those numbers show?
It kind of, to be honest, it kind of speaks to maybe some of the source of that stagnation, because they wrote that from 2020, they have roughly 384,000 new members that they achieved during that time period, the first 8 months. And that's 22,000 more than they projected. So that should be positive, right? That's 22,000 new members more than they were even expecting. Right. But they actually failed to retain members. They were short about 100,000 retained members.
I'd mentioned this with Professor Mittendorf. It's clearly like it's also like they're way off on their projections for that too, what they had expected. So I guess it must have come as something of a surprise to them, it seems. But they also have numbers in here comparing it to the previous year, right? And the revenue that they brought in.
Correct.
At least they don't have the membership numbers, right? They do have that graph, that section you're talking about, where they give some insight into renewals and new members, which I think if you project that out, they only have about 1.5 million people who would either be new members or renewals that year. So that's the thing about NRA membership numbers, is that they have a lot of different levels. So you have obviously lifetime members, which will not show up as renewals or new members ever, because they made their one-time lifetime purchase. Now, a lot of those people will also give money in form of membership contributions. It's just a different sort of category here that we also have data on. But then they also have 5-year memberships, 3-year memberships, 2-year memberships, 1-year membership. And so they might, even though they're on track to have 1.5 million new and renewing members, if the trends keep from this document, because again, this doesn't go through the whole year, but that doesn't mean that the other 4 million or the other 3.5 million or whatever it might be are all lifetime members. They might also just be people who had longer terms whose memberships weren't up. But yeah, you had a drop off across the board in revenue from membership, right? Between 2020 and 2021, is that?
Yeah. So new member revenue was down $2.5 million just from 2020. And then revenue from renewals was down another $4.8 million. So, that's a pretty steep drop off for the largest source of revenue for the organization.
Yeah. And then the same thing is true, actually even more so, for membership contributions. So people who are members, like I was talking about, perhaps a lifetime member that gives beyond, what they paid for the membership. Those are contributions, and those dropped even more dramatic.
Yeah,
right?
nearly $10 million, $9.8 million from 2020.
Yeah, that's rough. So overall, they were down about 17.1 million between 2020 and 2021 when it comes to how much money their members were giving them. I mean, now to be fair, they're still at over $100 million in revenue just from memberships, which sort of speaks to, there's a lot of, obviously, controversy around the NRA, and a lot of people will say different things about the gun lobby, or they're wholly funded by the gun groups. And this data also, while it shows, some very concerning things about their funding, if you're a supporter of the NRA, it also does show that the majority of their income is from their actual members, like, membership dues and membership contributions. So, that's another important thing I think to point out. But overall, the trend it's not pretty, right?
It's certainly not the brightest takeaway for an organization that already has enough trouble on its plate with legal battles that we've covered in the past. To lose nearly $17 million in revenue contributions year over year. It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, to be fair, they did cut expenses as well.
Sure.
So they cut away about $5.4 million worth of expenses when it comes to bringing in that money. So overall, they were down about 11.7 million compared to the previous, to the same period in 2020. But that's still, a really bad trend. That's not something that I think anyone who supports the NRA is going to look at and think is good news.